General Hospital spoilers tease that the storm that once swept through Port Charles is now brewing far beyond its borders. Across the Adriatic Sea, deep within the shadowy corners of Dubrovnik, Croatia, Britt Westbourne exists as a ghost, legally dead, emotionally confined, and medically tethered to the same darkness that once consumed her father. No one, not even her mother, knows she is alive. Her identity is buried beneath forged documents and false trails, all crafted and enforced by a quiet, enigmatic presence, Pascal, the gatekeeper. Pascal does not smile often. He does not speak unless necessary. He manages the seaside hotel Britt now calls home with the kind of precision that seems out of place for hospitality staff. His true role, however, is far more layered than it appears. He is her handler, her protector, her pharmacist, and her jailer. Every day he brings her a specific dosage of what he calls stabilizing medication, a thin blue vial designed to ease the progression of Huntington's disease. Without it, Britt deteriorates. With it, she survives. But there's something else. Something in the way Pascal watches her, something in his repeated invocation of him, the unseen man pulling all the strings. "You can't go out tonight," Pascal said one evening, stepping in front of the door just as Britt reached for her coat. She froze. He said no restaurants. No exposure. Britt's lips tightened. "I've already stayed dead. Isn't that enough?" Pascal did not answer. He simply lifted the silver tray in his hand and presented her daily dosage. "Take this. Then we'll talk." She did. Because she had to. But that night, Britt sat by her window and wondered, as she often did, about the man Pascal referenced only as he. At first, she assumed it was some anonymous benefactor, perhaps an underground boss in Eastern Europe or a rogue WSB agent. But the more she thought about it, the more certain she became. The manipulation, the secrecy, the medical control, it all pointed to one name. One man. A man who was supposed to be dead. Her father. Caesar Faison. The realization struck her like a bolt. It made the hairs on her arms rise, her breath shorten. Faison had died. She had seen the news. Had grieved, albeit in the twisted, complex way a daughter does for a tyrant parent. But what if it had all been a lie? What if Faison, like her, had faked his own death and rebuilt his power from the shadows? There were too many coincidences. The formula of the drug Pascal gave her was different from the original Huntington's treatment she had used years ago. She had noticed it after the first few doses. Subtle changes in her motor functions, a lingering fog behind her thoughts that didn't align with what she had experienced before. She asked Pascal once, "Is this a new variant of the medication?" His answer was clinical. "Adjusted for your needs." But whose needs were those? Hers or her father's? Britt knew Faison had always been obsessed with control. With obedience. With legacy. And if he had inherited the gene for Huntington's, as she had, perhaps he had finally developed or stolen a true cure. But instead of sharing it fully with her, he administered it in fragments. Enough to sustain her, but never enough to free her. A method of control both grotesque and genius. She began keeping a journal. Every dosage. Every symptom. Every time Pascal mentioned him. She cross-referenced times Pascal left the hotel with changes in her symptoms. She tested tiny drops of the medication on leftover test strips she had salvaged from her early days in Croatia. Her suspicions grew darker with each entry. She was being managed like an experiment. But then something unexpected happened. Jason Morgan appeared. At first, she thought she was hallucinating. He stood across the street, leaning casually against a lamppost, sunglasses hiding his eyes. She watched from behind her curtain, heart pounding. She hadn't seen him since the explosion in Greece. She had assumed he was dead too. But Jason was alive. And unlike everyone else in her life, he had found her. He had followed the breadcrumbs she didn't even know she left, an encrypted medical note sent to a former WSB contact, a bank withdrawal in Montenegro, a trail of rare pharmaceuticals sourced only through high-tier black market labs. Jason had pieced it together. And he had come not only to find her, but to save her. Their reunion was cautious. Britt met him under cover of darkness in the back garden of the hotel, her hair tucked under a scarf, her eyes scanning for Pascal. "I shouldn't be out here," she whispered. "He'll know." "Who?" Jason asked. She hesitated. Then finally, she said it. "My father. Faison." Jason's face didn't flinch. He simply nodded. "I thought so." Jason had his own reasons to suspect Faison's survival. A recent arms raid in Prague had unearthed weapons traced back to Faison's old suppliers. A covert message intercepted by Anna Devane had mentioned the Phoenix operating out of the Adriatic. It all pointed toward a resurrection that no one wanted to believe. Until now. Britt gave Jason everything she had, her journal and used files, surveillance footage she had secretly copied from Pascal's laptop. Jason began building a case. But he warned her, if Faison is alive, he's watching everything. "We can't rush this." But time was slipping. Britt's condition was worsening. Pascal had started delaying her doses, claiming there were supply issues. Britt knew better. This was punishment for meeting Jason, for daring to plan an escape. One night, she confronted Pascal. "Tell me the truth," she demanded. "Is he here? In Dubrovnik?" Pascal didn't deny it. He only stared at her, then quietly said, "You are alive because he allows it." Britt slapped him. Hard. For a moment, they stood in silence, the only sound the distant hum of the ocean. Then Pascal handed her the next dose. "Take it. Or don't. It's your choice." But it wasn't a choice. Not really. The next day, Britt faked a seizure. She collapsed in the hotel courtyard, convulsing with practiced precision. Pascal panicked. He called for a doctor, one of Faison's. But Britt had timed everything perfectly. Jason intercepted the doctor's car. By the time Pascal realized the deception, Jason had Britt hidden in a safehouse outside the city. Britt went through withdrawal. It was brutal. She screamed. She hallucinated. Jason held her hand through the worst of it. He never judged. Never wavered. When the fevers broke and Britt could finally speak, she asked one thing. "Are you sure he's alive?" Jason showed her what he had found. A photograph of a man in a private clinic outside Trieste. His face obscured. But the gait, the stance, it was unmistakable. Faison. And worse still, the clinic specialized in genetic therapy. Jason and Britt knew then they had to act. They had to expose him. But they couldn't do it alone. They needed someone with both the reach and the reason to care. They needed Liesl. But Liesl didn't know Britt was alive. The first meeting was arranged through Brooklyn. Britt recorded a video message explaining everything, her survival, her father's manipulation, her dependency on the altered medication. She begged her mother to believe her. When Liesl watched it, she collapsed in Anna's arms. "She's alive," she whispered. "And he's still here?" Liesl's heartbreak was immeasurable. But her fury was worse. She called in every favor, every contact still loyal to her from her WSB days. She reopened sealed case files. She traced Pascal's financial trail and discovered his connections to a shell company operating under Faison's old codename. The trail led back not only to Dubrovnik, but to Port Charles. Because Faison wasn't just controlling Britt. He had begun reaching back into the lives of those who had once destroyed him. And now, the town that thought it had escaped his shadow would soon learn he was very much alive and already watching. As the sun dipped behind the crimson-tinted rooftops of Dubrovnik, the faint sound of bells from a nearby cathedral drifted across the old stone streets. Inside a dimly lit apartment near the edge of the city, Britt paced. Her body trembled with residual weakness from the withdrawal, but her mind, free from the chemical fog, was sharper than it had been in months. Jason stood across the room, dismantling a burner phone and scattering the pieces into separate bags. Britt knew time was running out. they could not remain hidden for long. Pascal had eyes everywhere, and Faison, if truly alive, had already sensed the disturbance in his carefully orchestrated illusion. Jason handed her a document. "This is a new identity. Claudia Weiss. You'll be on a train to Vienna at dawn. Liesl has a contact in the Austrian consulate who'll help you cross into Switzerland." "I'm not leaving," Britt said, her voice hoarse but steady. "Not while he's out there." Jason looked at her, unwavering. "Then we end it. Together." Back in Port Charles, Liesl had quietly assembled a clandestine network. It included Brooklyn Courtemain, who had recently distanced herself from the ELQ drama and focused all her attention on reuniting her fractured family. Liesl, ever the tactician, knew that Brooklyn was more than a grieving mother, she was someone with access, someone underestimated. Brooklyn's heartbreak over Joe's arrest had grown into fury. She had not forgiven Dante. She understood his role as a detective, but the betrayal of turning his own son in, especially when Gio was acting under moral conviction, shattered something in her. Gio, locked in a juvenile facility awaiting trial, refused all visitors except for Emma Scorpio Drake. Emma snuck into the visitation area using credentials borrowed from a WSB intern and slipped Gio a notebook containing sketches of Dalton's lab. She whispered rapidly, "Dalton is tied to something bigger. I think he's part of a network that your grandfather, Faison, may have started." Joe's eyes narrowed. "Faison is dead." Emma shook her head. "We're not so sure anymore." Inside the lab, Dalton had gone quiet. After the break-in, he increased security and made veiled remarks to his colleagues about watchdogs being off the leash. He had cut contact with Pascal, fearing exposure, and began destroying records, test logs, experiment blueprints, anything that could be tied back to his mysterious benefactor. But one assistant, a young graduate named Mara, had secretly backed up the files on an encrypted drive. She wasn't loyal to Dalton. She was loyal to Emma, who had once tutored her in organic chemistry. And now, she planned to give everything to her mentor. Emma handed the drive to Liesl, who immediately saw the implications. The documents showed gene therapy experiments using synthetic variants of Huntington's treatments. One file was particularly disturbing, an exact sequence match to Britt's known DNA, tagged with the codename Subject Phoenix. "Faison," Liesl whispered, her hand trembling. It all made sense. Faison hadn't just survived. He had continued his twisted obsession with genetic manipulation. Britt had been his prototype, both guinea pig and daughter, a cruel fusion of science and blood. And now, he was expanding. Dalton's lab was one of many. This was no longer about one woman's survival. It was about a revival of Faison's legacy, engineered through bioscience, and Port Charles stood unknowingly at the epicenter of it. Meanwhile, Dante faltered beneath the weight of his decisions. He had become a stranger to his sons. Rocco, upon discovering the truth of his birth, declared his intent to move in with Liesl and Britt, still unaware his biological mother had been alive all along. The betrayal stung deeper than Dante imagined. He had fought so long to be a father, only to lose both children within months. One evening, he visited Joe's facility, not as a detective, but as a father. He found his son sitting alone, staring at a chessboard with missing pieces. "I didn't come to argue," Dante said quietly. "Good," Gio replied, not looking up. "Because I don't have anything left to say to you." Dante sat down. "I didn't know what else to do." "You were breaking into a federal lab." "I was trying to expose abuse," Gio snapped. "But you couldn't see past the badge." "I'm your father." "You're a cop first," Gio said coldly. The silence stretched between them. Then Gio looked up. "Emma thinks Faison is alive." Dante froze. "That's not possible. You arrested me for trying to stop something bigger than either of us. Maybe now you'll believe me." The seed of doubt was planted. Back in Croatia, Pascal returned to the hotel alone. Britt and Jason were gone. He tore the room apart but found no trace. In his rage, he sent a message through the encrypted network only Faison's loyalists still used. It read, "Subject Phoenix has escaped. Handler compromised. Possible exposure imminent." Across a different continent, the message was received. Inside a mountain facility in southern Germany, a shadowed figure stood before a glass panel, watching a new subject undergo treatment. His reflection shimmered on the surface, white hair slicked back, piercing eyes flickering with a distorted mixture of triumph and madness. Caesar Faison was indeed alive. Rejuvenated through his own technology, modified by stolen research, and no longer burdened by his deteriorating gene. He muttered to himself, "They always thought death was the end. They underestimated evolution." He turned to a technician. "Bring me subject Omega." A new figure entered, a boy no older than 16. His face eerily familiar. Dark hair. Eyes like Britt's. A clone. One of many. Faison had gone further than anyone imagined. He had begun creating his own bloodline, genetic copies built from harvested DNA. Britt had not been his only project. Geo, it seemed, had unknowingly triggered something massive. The breach into Dalton's lab had revealed only a single tentacle of a much larger organism. And now, with the alarm sounded, Faison was accelerating his plans. Jason and Britt arrived in Vienna, where Liesl met them at a safe house. She embraced her daughter tightly, but it was Jason she looked at when she spoke. "We go public," Liesl said. "Everything. The experiments. The drugs. The network." "No," Jason replied. "Not yet. We still don't have proof Faison is alive." Liesl held up the drive. "We will. But it means going back. One last time." Brooklyn offered her support in a way no one expected. She volunteered to act as bait. Dalton still trusted her, believed she could be manipulated into funding further research under the guise of corporate expansion. Brooklyn agreed to set up a meeting in Port Charles. Dalton couldn't resist. He traveled back, hoping to secure financial backing and hide the crumbling remains of his operations. But he didn't expect Emma to be waiting in the shadows, camera in hand, recording every word. Dalton spilled more than he should have. Fear had made him sloppy. He spoke of Phoenix. Of Subject Omega. Of the man financing everything. It was enough. Jason and Dante watched the footage together. The old wounds between them still raw, but their common enemy required unity. Dante finally saw what Geo had tried to do. And when he looked back at the footage and heard Dalton say Faison's name, everything changed. Geo was released. Britt stood outside the courthouse as her son stepped into the sunlight. Their hug was silent. Healing would take time. But the war had begun. And in the shadows of Europe, Faison watched the entire scene unfold on a monitor, his expression unreadable. He leaned forward and whispered, "Let them come. I have only just begun."